The moment I realized I hated my job wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No boss yelling at me. No big failure. Just a Tuesday morning, sitting in a gray office cubicle with a spreadsheet open in front of me, realizing I didn't care about a single thing on the screen. Not the numbers. Not the deadlines. Not the promotion my manager kept hinting about. I stared at the blinking cursor and thought, if I stay here 5 more years, I'm going to disappear. I was 27, technically doing well. Stable job in finance. Good salary. Predictable future. And somehow, that made it worse. Everyone around me seemed grateful for the life I had. My parents were proud. My coworkers talked about retirement plans like they were already halfway there. Meanwhile, I felt like I'd accidentally stepped onto someone else's path and kept walking because it was easier than turning around. That realization sat with me for weeks. Every morning, same commute, same elevator ride, same polite conversations about quarterly targets. I kept waiting for the feeling to go away. It didn't. One Friday evening, my boss stopped by my desk. "Dominic," he said, leaning against the cubicle wall, "we're discussing leadership tracks for next year. I think you'd be a strong candidate." Most people would have been excited. Instead, my stomach dropped. Leadership track meant 5, maybe 10 more years inside the exact same system. "That's great," I said automatically. He smiled. "Think about it over the weekend." I nodded, pretending I would. But the entire subway ride home, I kept hearing one sentence repeating in my head. "You're about to lock yourself into a life you don't even want." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and typed something I hadn't let myself search before. How to change careers after 25. The internet exploded with advice. Articles, videos, forums, stories from people who had quit stable jobs to start over. Some were inspiring. Some sounded like disasters. But one thing kept appearing again and again: boot camps, intensive training programs, a few months long, completely different fields, complete reset, coding, design, marketing, product development. I clicked through one site after another until I landed on a small UX design program starting in 3 months. User experience design. I barely understood what it meant, but something about it made sense to me. The idea of building things people actually use instead of staring at numbers all day. At the bottom of the page was a simple button. Apply now. I stared at it for a long time. Changing careers sounded exciting when it was theoretical. Actually doing it meant quitting my job, burning through savings, starting from zero again. My finger hovered over the mouse. This is insane, I thought. Then another voice answered back. "So is spending your entire life somewhere you hate?" Before I could overthink it, I clicked. Application submitted. The confirmation email arrived instantly. And just like that, the life I'd been living started to feel temporary. 3 months later, I walked into a classroom full of strangers who were also starting over. Some were younger than me, some older. A former teacher, a guy who used to work in retail, someone who had been a lawyer for 8 years before quitting. Everyone had the same, slightly nervous energy, like we'd all jumped off a cliff and were still waiting to see if a parachute would open. I grabbed a seat near the back. "Hey," someone said beside me. I turned. The guy sitting next to me looked about my age. Dark hair, calm eyes, the kind of quiet confidence that makes you immediately curious about someone. "First day nerves?" he asked. I laughed softly. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." He extended a hand. "I'm Quentin. Dominic." We shook hands. His grip was warm and steady. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "what were you before this?" "Financial analyst," I said, which sounds impressive until you realize it just means staring at spreadsheets all day. He smiled. "Ah, numbers guy escaping. What about you?" For a second, something thoughtful passed across his face. "Architecture," he said. I blinked. "That seems like a bigger career jump." "Maybe," he said, "but I figured if I was going to rebuild my life, I might as well do it now." Rebuild my life. The way he said it made it sound simple. Like changing direction wasn't a crisis, just a decision. Our instructor walked in then, launching into introductions and schedules and project timelines. But throughout the entire orientation, I kept noticing the guy beside me. Quentin took notes carefully, asked smart questions, listened more than he talked. At one point, he leaned toward me and whispered, "Did you understand that part about design frameworks?" "Not even slightly," I whispered back. He smiled again. And for the first time since quitting my old job, I felt something unexpected. Not fear. Excitement. Because suddenly, starting over didn't feel like falling alone. That first week was chaos. New concepts, new software, new terminology that made my brain feel like it was learning a completely different language. Every evening, I went home exhausted. Not the dull, drained exhaustion from my old office job. This was different. My mind felt stretched in ways it hadn't been for years. And somehow, Quentin was always right there in the middle of it. We ended up sitting next to each other every day without even planning it. By Wednesday, we were already helping each other through assignments. Your layout is better than mine, I admitted one afternoon, staring at his screen. He shrugged. Your research notes are better than mine. We'll survive. Barely. He laughed quietly. Over the next few days, we started talking more during breaks. Nothing heavy at first. Where we grew up. How we ended up here. Why we both finally decided to change our lives. One evening after class, we stayed late finishing a project. Everyone else slowly left until it was just the two of us and the soft hum of the computers. Quentin stretched his arms and leaned back. Can I admit something? He said. Sure. I thought I was the only person crazy enough to quit a stable career for this. I smiled. Same. He glanced at me. You ever feel like everyone else figured life out except you? All the time. For a moment, we just sat there in the quiet classroom. Two people who had both decided to start over. And somehow ended up sitting next to each other on the first day. That's when I realized something I didn't expect. Changing careers might have been the scariest decision I'd ever made. But meeting Quentin already felt like the best unexpected part of it. The second week of the program was when reality really hit. The excitement of starting something new faded quickly once the assignments became harder. Our instructor gave us our first major project, redesigned the user experience for an existing mobile app. Research, interviews, prototypes, presentations. 3 weeks. Half the class looked panicked, including me. I stared at the assignment brief like it was written in another language. You look like you're about to run away, Quentin said beside me. I'm considering it. He leaned over slightly to look at my screen. What part is scaring you? All of it, I admitted. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Let's break it down. That became our routine without either of us officially deciding it. We worked together after class most days. Not cheating, not copying, just helping each other understand things faster. Sometimes we stayed in the classroom. Sometimes we moved to a small coffee shop across the street that stayed open late. The baristas started recognizing us by the end of the first week. Design guys? She asked one night while handing us our drinks. Something like that, Quentin said. We always took the same corner table. Quentin usually brought a notebook filled with sketches. My laptop was full of messy research notes. You're good at seeing the big picture, he told me one evening. And you're good at making things look like they actually belong on a screen, I replied. Good, he said. Then we're useful to each other. The strange thing was how easy everything felt around him. With most people, conversations take effort. You think about what to say next. You worry about sounding awkward. With Quentin, hours passed without either of us noticing. We talked about the course, about the careers we left behind, about the strange feeling of starting over while most people our age were settling down. One night, after we had been working quietly for almost an hour, Quentin suddenly asked, Do you regret it? I looked up from my laptop. Regret what? Quitting your old life. The question caught me off guard. I thought about my old office, the cubicle, the spreadsheets, the promotions I was supposed to want. No, I said slowly. I think I regret staying there as long as I did. He nodded like that answer made perfect sense. Same, he said. There was a short silence. Then he added quietly, I thought architecture was my dream job when I was younger. What changed? He leaned back in his chair, thinking. I realized I liked the idea of it more than the reality, he said. The creativity, the designs, the buildings. But the job itself, it drained me. I understood that feeling immediately. When did you decide to leave? I asked. About 6 months ago. That fast? He smiled faintly. No, the decision took years. I just didn't admit it to myself until 6 months ago. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the night, because it felt exactly like what had happened to me. We didn't wake up one morning and suddenly want different lives. We had been slowly realizing it for a long time. The difference was that we had finally done something about it. A few days later, something small happened that changed the dynamic between us. It was raining heavily after class. Most people rushed out with umbrellas. I stood near the entrance, watching the water hit the pavement. Forgot yours, Quentin asked. Yeah. He looked outside, then back at me. I have one, he said. We can share. It was a simple offer. But the umbrella was small, which meant we had to walk closer than normal. The rain was still falling hard as we stepped onto the sidewalk. Quentin held the umbrella above us while we walked toward the subway station. Our shoulders occasionally brushed. Neither of us moved away. The city looked different in the rain. Quieter. Lights reflecting across the wet street. At one point, Quentin glanced sideways at me. You know what's funny? He said. What? If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd quit architecture and spend my nights redesigning grocery apps with a former finance guy, I laughed. You would have thought they were insane? Completely. We stopped at a red light. Cars passed slowly through the intersection. Are you glad you did it? He asked. The question sounded casual, but something in his voice made it feel more important. Yes, I said honestly. Then I added, mostly because it led me here. He looked at me, not confused, just thoughtful. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then the light changed, and we started walking again. By the third week, people in the program started forming small groups. Study partners, project teams, friend circles. Somehow, Quentin and I were always together. It happened naturally. We worked well together. We understood each other's thinking. But there was something else too. A kind of quiet comfort that had grown between us. One evening after class, we stayed behind again to finish our prototype. The classroom lights were dim except for the screens. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. My brain is done, I said. Quentin laughed softly. Mine too. We both stared at the design on the screen. This is actually good, I admitted. You think so? Yeah. He smiled slightly. We make a decent team. There was something warm in the way he said it. Not dramatic, just honest. I turned toward him. You ever think about what happens after the program ends? I asked. All the time. Scared. A little. He looked at me again. But less than before. Why? Quentin didn't answer immediately. Then he said quietly, because starting over isn't as lonely as I thought it would be. I understood what he meant. Because I had been thinking the same thing. When I walked into that classroom on the first day, I thought I was jumping into an unknown future alone. Instead, I had met someone who was doing the exact same thing. And somehow, that made the entire risk feel worth it. But what I didn't realize yet was that Quentin and I weren't just changing our careers. We were about to change each other's lives too. By the fourth week, the boot camp had turned into something intense. Not just busy, intense. Everyone in the program realized the same thing at the same time. This wasn't a hobby. This was supposed to become our new careers, which meant late nights, deadlines, constant pressure to improve faster than we thought possible. The classroom stayed full long after the official lessons ended. Quentin and I were almost always among the last people there. One night around 10, I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. I missed the part where my job ended at 5, I said. Quentin smiled from across the table. You mean the job you hated? Okay, fair point. He closed his laptop and stretched his arms above his head. You're doing well, though, he added. Are you sure? Yeah. How can you tell? He pointed at my screen. 3 weeks ago, you were terrified of opening the design software. Now you're redesigning entire flows without asking for help. I looked at the prototype again. He wasn't wrong. Still messy. Still learning. But it was something I had built. Look at you, I said. Giving motivational speeches now. I'm serious. His tone softened slightly. You underestimate yourself a lot. The comment stayed in the air for a moment. Then I asked, what about you? What about me? You ever doubt yourself? Quentin leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. All the time. That's hard to believe. He laughed quietly. You see the confident version of me. You don't see the version that spent 3 months wondering if quitting architecture was the biggest mistake of my life. I watched him carefully. What changed? He glanced at me. This place helped. Then he added, and meeting someone who understands exactly what it feels like to start over. Something about the way he said it made my chest feel unexpectedly warm. Our final project teams were announced the next day. 6 teams, 2 people each. When the instructor started reading names, I didn't think much about it. Until I heard Dominic and Quentin. We both looked at each other at the same time. Quentin smiled. Well, he said, that worked out. The final project was bigger than anything we had done so far. Real client, real product, real presentation to industry professionals at the end of the program. 6 weeks to complete it, which meant we would probably be spending even more time together. Strangely, that didn't worry me. If anything, it felt natural. A few days later, we met at the same coffee shop to start planning the project. The barista greeted us like old regulars. "Your usual table?" "Please," Quentin said. We spread notebooks, laptops, and sketches across the small table. The project was redesigning a travel booking website. "Okay," Quentin said, tapping his pen against the table. "First question. What? What do travelers actually hate about booking trips?" "Everything." "Good start." We laughed. Then we started working. Hours passed quickly. Research notes turned into ideas. Ideas turned into sketches. At some point, the barista turned the lights slightly lower as closing time approached. Quentin checked his phone. "Wow, it's almost midnight." "Seriously?" "Yeah." I stretched my arms. My brain might actually be melting. He gathered some papers into a neat stack. "Let's stop for tonight." We packed our things slowly. Neither of us seemed in a hurry to leave. When we stepped outside, the city was quiet again, late enough that most people had gone home. We walked toward the subway together. Halfway there, Quentin said something unexpected. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "If someone asked me the best part of this program so far." He paused. "I wouldn't say learning design." I raised an eyebrow. "No." He shook his head slightly. "I'd say the conversations after class." I smiled. "Same." We reached the subway entrance and stopped. Neither of us moved right away. There was a comfortable silence between us. Then Quentin said quietly, "I'm glad we met." The sentence was simple, but something about the way he said it made it feel more important than casual small talk. "Me too," I said. He nodded slowly. Then we both headed down the subway stairs. Over the next 2 weeks, something began shifting between us. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just small things. We started texting about project ideas even when we weren't together. Sometimes the messages had nothing to do with the project at all. A funny article, a design inspiration, a random thought during the day. One evening he sent, "Quentin, I just realized something." "Dominic, should I be worried?" "Quentin, probably." "Dominic, okay, now I'm definitely worried." "Quentin, we spend more time together than anyone else in this program." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Dominic, that's what happens when you're project partners." A few seconds passed. Then another message appeared. "Quentin, yeah, that's the official explanation." I felt my heart beat slightly faster reading that. Because somehow, I knew what he meant, and I wasn't sure if either of us was ready to say it out loud yet. The turning point came during a late-night work session in the classroom. Everyone else had already gone home. Quentin and I were sitting side by side reviewing our prototype. "You know," he said suddenly, "6 months ago my life looked completely different." "Mine too. I thought success meant staying on the same path forever." "Same." He turned slightly toward me. "Now it feels like the best decision I ever made was leaving it." I looked at him. "Same again." He smiled. Then his expression softened. And not just because of the career change. There was something unspoken in that sentence. Something both of us could feel. But neither of us interrupted the silence that followed. Because deep down, I think we both knew something important was starting. We just hadn't figured out what to do about it yet. By the middle of the program, Quentin had become part of my daily life in a way I didn't expect. It wasn't just the project. It was everything around it. Morning messages before class. "Did you finish the user flow?" "Barely." "Same." Coffee before lectures. Late-night design debates. Random conversations that somehow moved from UI layouts to life decisions. Starting over had been terrifying at first, but somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like a risk. Mostly because Quentin was going through the exact same thing, and he understood things other people didn't. One evening we stayed late again. The classroom lights were dim, and most of the city outside the windows had already gone dark. Quentin leaned over my laptop. "I think the navigation should be simpler," he said. "You said that 3 times already. And you ignored me 3 times. Because you're wrong." He laughed. "You're stubborn. You're opinionated. Those are basically the same thing." I turned toward him. "You started it." He smiled in that quiet way he had. For a second, neither of us looked away. Then he said softly, "You know what I realized today?" "What?" "If we had met a year ago, we probably wouldn't even be sitting here." That caught my attention. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair. "A year ago, I worked 60 hours a week. I barely had time for anything except architecture projects." "Same," I said. "My life was basically office, subway, sleep." Quentin nodded. "So if our old lives had continued, we probably never would have crossed paths." I thought about that. Two completely different careers. Two completely different routines. Two completely different versions of ourselves. Yet somehow we had both decided to start over at the exact same moment and ended up sitting next to each other on the first day. That's weird to think about, I said. Yeah. He looked at me again. But I'm glad it didn't happen that way. Something warm settled in my chest. Me too, I said quietly. A week later, something happened that made things clearer. Our instructor scheduled a full practice presentation for each team. Everyone would present their project progress in front of the class. Feedback, criticism, questions. Basically a rehearsal for the final presentation. Public speaking had never scared me before, but standing there with our work on the screen suddenly felt different. This is a bad idea, I whispered to Quentin while we waited for our turn. You'll be fine. I'm serious. You survived finance meetings, he said calmly. You can survive design students. That's not reassuring. He smiled slightly. Trust me. Our names were called. We walked to the front of the room together. I explained the research. Quentin walked through the interface design. Then we demonstrated the prototype. For 10 minutes, everything flowed naturally, like we had rehearsed it 100 times. When we finished, the instructor nodded thoughtfully. Good work, she said. Very clear collaboration between you two. A few students asked questions. Someone complimented the navigation structure. Another pointed out a small improvement we could make. Overall, the feedback was positive. When we sat back down, I finally exhaled. Okay, I said. That wasn't terrible. Quentin leaned closer. I told you. Don't get smug. Too late. But there was something else in the way he looked at me. Not just pride in the project. Something more personal. Something warmer. That night we decided to celebrate surviving the presentation. Nothing big. Just dinner at a small restaurant near the classroom. It was the first time we had hung out somewhere that wasn't a coffee shop or the classroom. And strangely, it felt different. Less like classmates. More like something else. The restaurant was quiet. Soft lighting. A few other tables filled with late-night conversations. Quentin looked more relaxed than usual. You realize, he said while glancing at the menu. This is technically our first non-work meeting. I laughed. You mean a normal dinner? Exactly. Feels strange. A little. But he didn't look uncomfortable. If anything, he looked thoughtful. Halfway through dinner, he asked something unexpected. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Why did you really quit finance? I leaned back in my chair. Honestly, yeah. I thought for a moment. Because I woke up one day and realized I couldn't picture my future anymore. He listened carefully. I continued. I could picture the promotions, the salary increases, the bigger apartment someday. But none of it made me feel anything. Quentin nodded slowly. That's exactly how I felt with architecture. There was a quiet understanding between us again. Then he added something softer. Starting over is scary though. Definitely. But, he paused. It's easier when you don't feel alone. The sentence lingered in the air. I met his eyes. And suddenly the restaurant felt quieter than before. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then Quentin smiled slightly. I guess what I'm saying is. He hesitated. I'm really glad you're part of this experience. My heart felt strangely light hearing that. Same, I said. When we left the restaurant, the air outside was cool. The streets were mostly empty. We walked slowly toward the subway again. Halfway there, Quentin stopped. Wait, he said. What? I forgot something. What? He looked at me for a second, then said quietly, I don't think we're just project partners anymore. My heart skipped slightly. What do you think we are then? He smiled gently. I'm still figuring that part out. And somehow, I realized I was too. After that night, something between Quentin and me changed. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but the quiet understanding between us started to feel different. Before, we were two people going through the same life transition. Now, there was something else layered on top of that. Something neither of us had named yet. The next morning, he texted me before class. Quentin, are you awake? I looked at the message while brushing my teeth. Dominic. Barely. Quentin. Good. That means you'll be in the right mood for coffee. Dominic. You bribing me with caffeine again? Quentin. Absolutely. When I arrived at the coffee shop near the classroom, he was already there with 2 cups on the table. You're becoming predictable, I said as I sat down. You say that like it's a bad thing. It's suspicious. He laughed quietly. You'll survive. We walked into class together like we usually did. But now I was more aware of him. The way he leaned back in his chair when thinking. The way he tapped his pen lightly when concentrating. The The way he smiled when something finally clicked during a lesson. It wasn't distracting. If anything, it made the long days feel easier. Our final project was starting to take real shape. The research was complete. The interface design was nearly finished. Now we were building the full prototype and preparing for the final presentation, which meant even longer nights. One evening, the classroom emptied out earlier than usual. A few people had already finished their work for the day. Quentin and I stayed behind to polish our presentation slides. Around 10, I closed my laptop and stretched. My brain officially refuses to process more information, I said. Quentin looked up from his screen. Same. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. We've been here for 4 hours. Only 4. Feels like 8. I glanced around the quiet classroom. We should probably leave before we forget how daylight works. He nodded. Agreed. We packed our things slowly. As we walked outside, the city air felt fresh compared to the warm classroom. For a moment, we stood on the sidewalk without saying anything. Then Quentin said something that surprised me. Do you ever think about what happens after the program ends? All the time, I said. What do you picture? I thought about it. New job, new routine, a completely different career than the one I had before. But something else came to mind too. I guess I picture continuing this, I said. He tilted his head slightly. This? Working on things that actually interest me. He nodded. That part makes sense. Then he asked quietly, and outside of work? The question caught me off guard. I hadn't thought much about that part yet. I'm not sure, I admitted. What about you? Quentin looked down the street for a moment. Honestly, yeah. I think I want a life that feels intentional. Intentional, he nodded slowly. Not just drifting into the next thing because it's expected. That sounded exactly like something I would have said. I smiled. Sounds like you've thought about this a lot. He laughed softly. Probably too much. We reached the subway entrance again. That place had become a kind of unofficial checkpoint between us. The moment where our conversations slowed down before we went separate directions. Quentin stopped at the top of the stairs. Dominic, he said. Yeah. He hesitated for a moment, then said, Can I tell you something slightly embarrassing? Now I'm curious. He smiled faintly. When I first started this program, I told myself I was here purely for career reasons. That seems reasonable. Yeah, he said. But now I'm realizing that's not entirely true anymore. I felt my heart beat a little faster. What do you mean? He looked directly at me. I mean, this experience became a lot more important once I met you. The words were simple, but they landed with a kind of quiet honesty that made them feel heavier than a dramatic confession ever could. I didn't answer immediately, mostly because I was realizing something at the exact same moment. Meeting Quentin had changed this experience for me too. Maybe more than I had admitted to myself. I feel the same way, I said finally. His expression softened slightly. Good. Neither of us moved for a second. Then Quentin added with a small smile. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next week, the shift between us became impossible to ignore. We still worked together like before. Still joked. Still debated design decisions. But there were moments now where our conversations slowed. Where eye contact lasted a little longer. Where the quiet felt meaningful instead of neutral. One evening while reviewing the final prototype, Quentin leaned back in his chair. You realize something, right? He said. What? If we get hired by the same company after this program, we'll probably keep working together. That would be nice. Yeah. He smiled. But even if that doesn't happen, he paused. I don't think this connection is going anywhere. My chest felt warm hearing that. Because I had been thinking the same thing. Not just about the project. Not just about the career change. But about him. About the way he had quietly become one of the most important parts of this entire experience. And maybe something more. The final week of the program arrived faster than either of us expected. 6 weeks had somehow disappeared. The classroom that once felt unfamiliar now felt routine. The people who had been strangers on the first day were now friends, competitors, and teammates all at once. But the biggest change for me wasn't the program. It was Quentin. Somewhere between the late nights, the endless design revisions, and the quiet walks to the subway, he had become part of my life in a way that felt natural. Not forced, not dramatic, just right. The final presentations were scheduled for Friday. Industry guests would attend, hiring managers, design leads, people who could potentially offer jobs, which meant the pressure in the classroom was intense. Everyone was polishing slides, rehearsing presentations, and triple-checking every detail. Quentin and I had stayed late nearly every night that week. Thursday evening was our final rehearsal. The classroom was quiet again, just like it had been many nights before. Quentin stood at the front of the room, clicking through the slides. And this redesigned flow reduces the booking time by nearly 30%. He finished. I watched from the back row. Nice, I said. Confident. You think so? Yeah. Way better than our first practice. He walked back to the table and sat down beside me. Your research section is solid too, he said. That part I'm comfortable with. He nodded. Then there was a small pause. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Tomorrow's the last day, he said quietly. Yeah, that's strange to think about. It really is. I leaned back in my chair. 6 weeks ago, we walked into this place with no idea what we were doing. And now we're presenting a full product redesign. Life moves fast, I said. Quentin smiled slightly. It does. But something about his expression had shifted. Less focused on the project. More thoughtful. Dominic, he said after a moment. Yeah. Can I tell you something honestly? Of course. He looked directly at me. When this program started, I thought the best outcome would be getting a new job. That seems reasonable. But now, he continued slowly, I think the best part of this entire experience was meeting you. For a second, I didn't know what to say. Not because the words surprised me, but because I had been thinking the exact same thing. This program changed my life, I said. He nodded slightly. Mine too. But not just because of the career change. His expression softened. I know. The next day arrived quickly. The classroom was full. Industry guests sat along the back wall with notebooks and laptops. The atmosphere felt serious. One by one, teams presented their projects. Some were nervous. Some were confident. Everyone had clearly worked hard. Finally, our names were called. Dominic and Quentin. We walked to the front together, just like we had practiced. The presentation flowed smoothly. I explained the research and user interviews. Quentin demonstrated the interface and prototype. The audience asked thoughtful questions. Several people nodded during the demonstration. When we finished, the instructor smiled. Excellent work, she said. Walking back to our seats felt surreal. 6 weeks of work. Done. Quentin leaned slightly toward me. We did it, he whispered. Yeah, I said. We actually did. That evening, the class gathered at a nearby bar to celebrate finishing the program. People were laughing, talking about job interviews, sharing contact information. The atmosphere was lighter than it had been in weeks. Quentin and I stood near the window talking quietly. So, he said, holding his drink, this is the part where everyone goes in different directions. Probably. Different companies. Different cities. Maybe. He looked thoughtful, but not necessarily. What do you mean? Well, he said with a small smile. Career paths can change quickly. I laughed. Yeah, we're proof of that. There was a short pause. Then he said something quietly. I'd like to keep building something with you. I raised an eyebrow. Design projects? He smiled. Life. The word hung in the air between us. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. Just honest. For a moment, I thought about everything that had happened. Quitting my job. Walking into that classroom. Meeting him on the first day. You know, I said slowly. Changing careers was the scariest decision I've ever made. He nodded. Same. But if I hadn't done it. I looked at him. We never would have met. Quentin smiled. And that would have been a pretty big loss. I couldn't help smiling back. Yeah, I said. It really would have. The days after the program ended felt strange. For 6 weeks, Quentin and I had seen each other almost every day. Same classroom. Same coffee shop. Same late-night conversations about design and life decisions. Then suddenly, it was over. No more morning lectures. No more staying in the classroom until 10 at night. Just a group chat full of classmates sharing job leads and interview tips. And a quiet apartment where I was trying to figure out what the next chapter of my life would look like. 3 days after graduation, my phone buzzed. Quentin, I think I found something interesting. I smiled immediately. Dominic, a job? Quentin, maybe. Startup company. Small design team. Dominic, that sounds promising. A moment later, another message appeared. Quentin, they're hiring 2 junior UX designers. I stared at the message, then typed back. Dominic, you're suggesting something, aren't you? A few seconds passed. Quentin, possibly. My heart started beating a little faster. Dominic, send me the link. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in the same coffee shop again. Not as students. As 2 people waiting to hear if we had just landed our first real design jobs. Quentin stared at his phone. This is stressful, he said. You're the one who told me to apply. And you're the one who actually convinced me we had a chance. I laughed. That's because we do. We had done 2 interviews. A design challenge. A final meeting with the product lead. Now we were just waiting, which might have been the worst part. Suddenly Quentin's phone buzzed. He froze. That might be it, he said. Well, he looked at the screen. Then his expression slowly changed. Okay, he said quietly. That looks good. My stomach dropped. You got it. He looked up at me. They offered me the position. I smiled immediately. That's amazing. But something in his expression told me there was more. He turned the phone slightly toward me. There's another message. I leaned closer. The email read, we would also like to extend an offer to Dominic if he is still interested in joining the team. I blinked. You're serious? Quentin grinned. I told you we had a chance. I leaned back in my chair, laughing in disbelief. Okay, that's insane. He nodded. In a good way. We started the new job a month later. First real day. First real design team. First time using the skills we had learned in the program. The office was small, fast-moving, full of creative energy. Exactly the kind of environment we had hoped to find. But the best part wasn't the office, or the projects, or even the fact that our risky career change had actually worked. The best part was that Quentin and I were doing it together. One evening after work, we walked out of the building and stopped on the sidewalk. It reminded me a little of those nights leaving the classroom after long work sessions. You realize something? Quentin said. What? If you hadn't hated your finance job, and if you hadn't quit architecture. He smiled. We never would have met. I thought about that for a moment. All the small decisions that had led to that point. Quitting a stable job, applying to a boot camp, sitting next to a stranger on the first day, and somehow that stranger becoming one of the most important people in my life. Changing careers felt terrifying at the time, I said. Yeah, Quentin agreed. But it was worth it. I looked at him. Definitely worth it. He smiled, then said quietly, best unexpected decision I ever made. I couldn't argue with that, because the truth was, starting over hadn't just changed my career. It had brought someone into my life who understood exactly what it meant to rebuild everything from the ground up. And sometimes the biggest risks lead to the best outcomes.